In the freezing winter of 1945, in the fog-covered fields of Alsace, something happened that most people have never truly heard about. We all grew up hearing that the German Tigers and Panthers were unbeatable, that the American Sherman was nothing but a rolling coffin. But the real story, the one hidden beneath the smoke and snow, is far more shocking. It's a story not about armor thickness, but about survival, doctrine, and the cold mathematics of war that Germany never understood until it was too late today. I'm going to show you the moment when that myth shattered. The moment when the soldiers inside those weak Shermans proved a truth so uncomfortable that even German tank crews couldn't believe it. And once you hear it, you'll never look at World War II the same way again.
January 12, 1945, Alsace-Lorraine, eastern France. The morning fog clung to the vineyard terraces like wet wool, muffling the growl of idling engines. In the predawn cold, frost had turned the mud roads into brittle glass that cracked beneath the weight of tracked vehicles. Somewhere beyond the mist, a church bell tolled once, then fell silent, as if the stone itself remembered what sound could summon. The American tankers of the 12th Armored Division sat inside their M4 Shermans, breath visible in the iron cold, hands wrapped around tin cups of coffee that had gone lukewarm an hour before. They did not speak. They had learned, in the weeks since crossing the Rhine bridgeheads, that silence was the only language the fog understood. 3 kilometers east, across a shallow valley dotted with shattered barns and frozen cart paths, the crews of the German 17th SS Panzergrenadier Division prepared their own steel. Their Tigers and Panthers, machines that had once symbolized the invincibility of German armor doctrine, now squatted in hastily dug revetments, their long guns angled toward the western tree line. The men inside these behemoths had been told again and again that the American Sherman was a death trap, a poorly armored coffin on tracks, built by a nation that valued quantity over quality, speed over protection. They had been told that a single round from an 88mm KK-36 gun could puncture a Sherman's frontal plate at 2,000 meters, turning the crew inside into vapor and ash. They had been told this so many times that it had become doctrine, then assumption, then legend. And legends, in war, are the most dangerous kind of truth. What followed in the fields of Alsace that winter morning would unravel that legend one burning wreck at a time. Not because the Shermans suddenly became invincible, but because the men who fought inside it had learned something the German tank crews had not. That survival in armored warfare was no longer a question of steel thickness alone. It was a question of doctrine, of coordination, of how a tank fit into the geometry of combined arms. And it was a question, above all, of mathematics, the cold, unforgiving arithmetic of industrial war, where the side that could afford to lose 3 tanks and still put 4 more on the field would ultimately decide the shape of history. But in that frozen moment before dawn, none of this had yet been proven. The fog was still thick, the guns were still silent, and both sides believed, with the conviction of men who had no choice but to believe, that their steel was stronger. The Sherman's reputation had been forged long before it ever met a Tiger in combat. In the spring of 1942, when the first M4 models rolled off the assembly lines in Detroit, Lima, and Grand Blanc, American armor officers viewed it as a miraculous compromise, a medium tank that could be mass-produced, shipped across oceans, and maintained by crews with minimal technical training. Its 75mm gun could handle the Panzer IIIs and IVs that dominated the North African desert. Its welded hull, though only 2 inches thick at the glacis, was sloped at an angle that increased effective protection. Its radial engine, borrowed from aircraft design, was reliable and could be swapped out in the field. Most importantly, it could be built at a rate of 2,000 per month, a production tempo that no other nation on Earth could match. The German army, by contrast, had invested its faith in engineering perfection. The Panther, introduced in 1943 after the shock of encountering Soviet T-34s at Kursk, carried frontal armor up to 80 millimeters thick and mounted a high-velocity 75 millimeter gun capable of penetrating nearly any Allied tank at range. The Tiger I, already legendary by 1944, boasted 100 millimeters of frontal protection and the fearsome 88 millimeter gun that could kill at distances where return fire was impossible. These machines were technological marvels, each one a masterpiece of metallurgy and optics, but they were also expensive, mechanically fragile, and slow to produce. By the time the Allies landed in Normandy, Germany was building fewer than 300 Panthers per month, and Tiger production rarely exceeded 50. This disparity bred a dangerous arrogance. German tank crews, veterans of the Eastern Front and the Western Desert, had come to view the Sherman with contempt. They called it the Tommy Cooker in North Africa, the Ronson in Normandy, a reference to the American cigarette lighter that advertised itself as lighting every time. The name was not without basis. Early Shermans, particularly those equipped with gasoline engines and stored ammunition racks near the turret ring, had a catastrophic tendency to ignite when penetrated. A single round through the sponson could turn the interior into an inferno within seconds, the crew's only hope being to bail out through hatches that often jammed under the force of the blast. By the autumn of 1944, American tankers had taken to calling their own vehicles death traps, and the statistical record seemed to confirm the nickname. In the bocage fighting of Normandy, Sherman losses averaged 4-1 against Panthers, and the ratio was even worse against Tigers. But statistics, like legends, are often incomplete. What the numbers did not capture was the operational context in which these losses occurred. The fact that Shermans were being used as breakthrough vehicles in terrain that favored ambush, or that German tanks, operating defensively with superior optics and gun range, could choose when and where to engage. What the numbers did not show was that for every Sherman lost, 2 more arrived on transport ships the following week, while German armor, bleeding irreplaceable crews and spare parts, struggled to maintain even half its nominal strength. And what the numbers certainly did not reflect was the quiet evolution taking place inside American armor doctrine, a shift that would turn the Sherman from a symbol of industrial brute force into something far more dangerous, a platform for combined arms dominance. The transformation began not with the tank itself, but with the men who crewed it. By the winter of 1945, the American armored divisions fighting in Alsace and the Ardennes were no longer the green, undertrained units that had stumbled through Normandy's hedgerows. They had learned, through blood and burning metal, that a Sherman could not slug it out with a Panther at range, but it did not have to. They had learned to fight in pairs and trios, using speed and maneuverability to flank German positions, while infantry suppressed anti-tank guns. They had learned to call in artillery and air support with a precision that turned every engagement into a coordinated storm of fire. And they had learned, most crucially, that the best way to kill a tiger was not to meet it head-on, but to force it into a position where it had no room to maneuver, no cover to hide behind, and no escape from the rolling barrage that would dismantle its tracks and optics long before a single tank round was fired. The Germans, by contrast, had learned nothing. Or rather, they had learned only how to fight the war they had already won, the War of 1940, when blitzkrieg doctrine and superior armor had shattered Allied defenses in weeks. They still believed that a single Tiger, properly positioned, could hold a crossroads against an entire American battalion. They still believed that crew skill and gun superiority could compensate for the hemorrhaging logistics that left half their tanks immobilized for lack of fuel. And they still believed, with a fervor that bordered on the theological, that the Sherman's thin armor made it fundamentally inferior, a machine unworthy of the battlefield. On the morning of January 12, in the mist-covered fields east of Sélestat, that belief would be tested by something more unyielding than steel. The reality of modern war, where survival was measured not in millimeters of plate, but in the density of radios, the accuracy of maps, and the willingness to accept that victory belonged not to the tank with the thickest armor, but to the army that could replace its losses faster than the enemy could count them. The engagement began at 0647, when a forward observer from the 12th Armored's Reconnaissance Battalion radioed contact with enemy armor moving south along Route Départementale 83. The report was terse, almost clinical. 3 heavies, probable Panthers, grid coordinates 48.2 by 7.4, moving at walking speed. Within minutes, the information had filtered up to divisional command, then back down to the tank platoons idling near the tree line. Lieutenant Howard Becker, commanding a platoon of 5 Shermans from Baker Company, 23rd Tank Battalion, received the order to advance and engage, not frontally, but through a flanking maneuver that would take his unit along a sunken farm road, using the terrain to mask their approach until they were within 500 meters of the German column. Becker's crew had been in combat for 11 weeks. His gunner, a machinist from Pennsylvania named Eugene Travers, had logged 43 confirmed engagements and survived 2 vehicle losses. His driver, a former cab driver from the Bronx, could navigate a Sherman through rubble and mud with the casual precision of a man parallel parking on a busy street. They were not heroes. They were not particularly brave, but they were proficient. And in the arithmetic of armored warfare, proficiency was worth more than courage. The approach took 30 minutes, the Shermans moving in a staggered column with 50 meters between each vehicle, their engines throttled low to minimize noise. The fog was lifting now, burned away by a pale January sun that turned the frosted fields into a glare of white and gold. Through his periscope, Becker could see the German tanks clearly now. Not Panthers, as the observer had reported, but 2 Tigers and a Panzer IV, their hulls dark against the snow, their long guns traversing slowly as they scanned the western horizon. They had not yet seen the Shermans. They were still hunting for targets in the wrong direction. Becker's voice crackled over the radio, calm and measured. "All units, hold position. Wait for my mark." The German crews, meanwhile, were confident. They had survived the Soviet offensives in the east, the grinding attrition of the Falaise pocket, the chaos of the Ardennes counteroffensive. They had killed Shermans by the dozen, watched them brew up at distances where American return fire fell harmlessly short. The Tiger's 88mm gun could penetrate 150 millimeters of armor at 1,000 meters, more than enough to punch through a Sherman's frontal plate, which measured only 63 millimeters at its thickest point and much less on the sides. The math was simple. The outcome was preordained. What they did not know, what they could not have known, because German intelligence had failed to track the evolution of American tactics over the preceding months, was that Becker's platoon was not planning to engage frontally. At 0714, when Becker gave the order to fire, his lead Sherman did not aim for the nearest Tiger. It aimed for the Panzer IV at the rear of the column, the lightest and most vulnerable target, the one whose destruction would block the road and trap the heavier tanks in a kill zone with no room to maneuver. The first round was a high-explosive shell, not armor-piercing. It struck the Panzer IV's engine deck and detonated in a bloom of orange flame, severing fuel lines and igniting the lubricant reservoirs. Within seconds, black smoke was pouring from the stricken vehicle, and the crew was bailing out, their uniforms smoldering. The 2 Tigers immediately began to reverse, their commanders shouting orders, but the road behind them was now blocked by burning wreckage. They had 2 choices: abandon the vehicles and retreat on foot, or turn and fight from a stationary position with no cover. They chose to fight. The lead Tiger's gun swung toward Becker's Sherman, the barrel depressing with mechanical precision. At 600 meters, the shot was almost impossible to miss. The 88mm round left the muzzle at 1,000 meters per second, a tungsten core dart designed to shatter steel. It struck Becker's Sherman on the frontal glacis, exactly where German doctrine predicted it would penetrate. And it bounced. The ricochet was not a miracle. It was geometry. The Sherman's glacis plate, sloped at 56 degrees from vertical, transformed the effective thickness of the armor from 63 millimeters to over 100 millimeters against a direct hit. The 88 millimeter round, striking at an oblique angle, skidded upward along the slope and deflected into the air, leaving nothing but a deep gouge in the steel and a shower of sparks. Inside the Sherman, the crew felt the impact like a hammer blow, their vision blurring for an instant, their ears ringing. But the hull held. The engine kept running, and Eugene Travers, the gunner, had already adjusted his aim. The return shot was a 76 millimeter armor-piercing round, the newer, more powerful ammunition that had begun replacing the old 75 millimeter shells in the autumn of 1944. It struck the Tiger on its right sponsum, where the armor was thinner and the angle less favorable. The round punched through, detonating inside the crew compartment. The Tiger shuddered once, then went still, smoke seeping from the hatches. The second Tiger fired twice more, hitting another Sherman in Becker's platoon and disabling its tracks. But by then, the rest of the American tanks had closed the distance and were firing from multiple angles. The Tiger's thick frontal armor was useless against shots coming from the side and rear. Within 3 minutes, it too was burning. The entire engagement lasted less than 10 minutes. 3 German tanks destroyed, 1 Sherman disabled but repairable, no American fatalities. Becker's after-action report, filed that evening, was characteristically dry. Engaged enemy armor at 600 meters. Used terrain and maneuver to achieve flanking position. Enemy tanks destroyed by coordinated fire. No casualties. But the report did not capture the look on the surviving German tankers' faces as they were marched into captivity. The bewilderment of men who had been taught that the Sherman was inferior, that German steel was invincible, and who had just watched that belief disintegrate under the weight of something they had not accounted for: doctrine, coordination, and the willingness to accept losses in exchange for operational success. The Americans, for their part, did not celebrate. They redistributed ammunition, refueled their tanks, and moved on to the next objective. Because that was the other lesson they had learned, the one the Germans never grasped: that in industrial war, no single battle mattered as much as the capacity to fight the next one. The myth of the Sherman's vulnerability persisted even as the evidence mounted against it. In the Ardennes, during the desperate fighting around Bastogne in December 1944, American tank destroyers and Shermans equipped with 76 millimeter guns knocked out over 400 German armored vehicles, including dozens of Tigers and Panthers. At the Battle of Aracourt in September 1944, the 4th Armored Division destroyed 281 German tanks while losing only 25 Shermans, a kill ratio that stunned even American commanders. And in the final push across the Rhine in March 1945, Sherman-equipped units outmaneuvered and outlasted German armor at every stage, not because their tanks were superior in a vacuum, but because they fought as part of a system that integrated artillery, air power, infantry, and logistics into a seamless whole. The Germans, meanwhile, continued to pour resources into ever heavier designs. The Tiger II, introduced in late 1944, carried frontal armor up to 180 millimeters thick and mounted an even more powerful 88 millimeter gun. It was nearly impervious to frontal attack and could kill any Allied tank at absurd ranges. It was also 70 tons of steel that consumed fuel at a catastrophic rate, broke down with maddening frequency, and could not cross most bridges without collapsing them. Only 492 were ever built, and fewer than half were operational at any given time. The Sherman, by contrast, was produced in numbers exceeding 49,000, with variants serving as tank destroyers, flamethrower platforms, bridge layers, and recovery vehicles. It was not a perfect machine, but it was a sufficient one, and in war, sufficiency at scale is the only perfection that matters. The psychological impact of this realization on German crews cannot be overstated. Men who had spent years believing in the superiority of their equipment, who had staked their survival on the idea that a tiger could hold a position against impossible odds, found themselves facing an enemy that simply did not care about individual superiority. The Americans would send 5 Shermans to kill 1 tiger, and when 3 of those Shermans were destroyed, 2 more would arrive the next day. The Germans could win every engagement and still lose the war, because the Americans had solved the fundamental problem of industrial conflict. They had built an army that could absorb losses and continue fighting, while the German war machine, for all its technical brilliance, could not. This was the secret that no amount of armor thickness could overcome. The Sherman survived not because it was invulnerable, but because it existed in such overwhelming numbers that its vulnerabilities became irrelevant. A tank that could be destroyed by an 88mm gun was still a functional weapon if it never had to face that gun alone, if it was always supported by artillery that could suppress enemy positions, by infantry that could clear anti-tank nests, by air cover that could strafe German supply lines and leave their armor stranded without fuel. The Sherman was not designed to win duels. It was designed to win wars. And yet, the myth endured. Even today, in the mythology of World War II, the Sherman is often remembered as a death trap, a flawed design that sent thousands of young men to their deaths in burning steel coffins. This narrative is not entirely false. Sherman crews did suffer horrific casualties in certain engagements, particularly in the early stages of the Normandy campaign when American doctrine was still evolving. But it is incomplete. It ignores the fact that, by the end of the war, Sherman crews had a higher survival rate than their German counterparts, not because their tanks were tougher, but because the system they fought within gave them a better chance of living through a hit. It ignores the testimony of veterans like Eugene Travers, who would later write in a letter to his family, "The Sherman wasn't the best tank in the war, but it was the one that got us home." That homecoming was built on a foundation of logistics that the Germans could never match. Every Sherman lost in combat was replaced, often within days, by a new tank shipped from American factories that operated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, staffed by workers who were never bombed, never starved, never forced to relocate production underground to escape Allied air raids. Every crewman killed was replaced by a trained replacement who had learned from the mistakes of his predecessors, who carried with him the accumulated knowledge of hundreds of engagements, distilled into doctrine and disseminated through training manuals that were updated monthly. The German army, by contrast, was bleeding experienced crews faster than it could train new ones, and the training it did provide was increasingly abbreviated, rushed, desperate. By 1945, German tank crews were being sent into combat with as little as 6 weeks of instruction, barely enough time to learn how to operate the vehicle, much less how to fight it effectively. This disparity extended to every level of armored warfare. American tank units were supported by dedicated recovery vehicles that could tow damaged Shermans off the battlefield and return them to service within hours. German tanks, when disabled, were often abandoned because the Wehrmacht lacked the fuel and spare parts to recover them. American crews communicated via radio networks that linked every tank, every infantry squad, every artillery battery into a single responsive organism. German units, by the final year of the war, were often reduced to using couriers and signal flags, their radios destroyed or out of fuel for the generators that powered them. And American tankers ate hot meals, slept in relative safety behind secure supply lines, and received regular mail from home. Small comforts that meant the difference between a crew that could fight for months and one that broke after weeks of continuous combat. The Germans called this American logistical superiority Materialschlacht, material battle, the grinding dominance of industrial output over tactical skill. They used the term with bitterness, as if there was something dishonorable about winning through production rather than prowess. But there was no dishonor in it, only the recognition of a fundamental truth that the German High Command had refused to accept. That modern war was no longer decided by the quality of individual weapons, but by the capacity of entire nations to sustain violence over time. The Sherman was the embodiment of that truth, a tank that was good enough, built in quantities large enough, supported by a system robust enough to ensure that no single defeat could ever be decisive. And so, when German tank crews laughed at the Sherman's paper armor, they were laughing at a ghost, a version of the war that had already ended. They were laughing at a tank that existed only in their own propaganda, a caricature of weakness that bore no resemblance to the machine they actually faced on the battlefield. A machine that could take an 88mm hit and keep moving, that could coordinate with infantry and artillery to turn every engagement into a trap, that could be destroyed and replaced faster than the Germans could count the wreckage. They were laughing, in other words, at their own defeat, though they did not yet know it. By the time they stopped laughing, the war was already over. There was a sound that American tankers came to associate with survival, a sound so mundane that it barely registered as significant until they had time, years later, to reflect on what it meant. It was the sound of a can opener biting into the lid of a sea ration tin, the metal peeling back to reveal beans or hash or fruit cocktail in heavy syrup. It was a sound heard in the field, in the hull of a Sherman, in the moments between engagements when crews sat in the cold and ate whatever the supply trucks had delivered that morning. It was a sound that German tankers, by the winter of 1945, almost never heard, because their rations had been cut to starvation levels, because the supply convoys that should have brought food and ammunition were being strafed by Allied fighters, because the logistical system that fed an army had collapsed under the weight of strategic bombing and fuel shortages. This sound, the soft, rhythmic scrape of steel on tin, became, in its own way, a symbol of the war's outcome. Not the thunder of guns or the roar of engines, but the quiet, unremarkable proof that one side could still feed its soldiers while the other could not. American tankers opened their rations and ate without thinking, because food was always there, as reliable as the fuel in their tanks and the ammunition in their racks. German tankers, when they ate at all, scraped the bottoms of empty cans and chewed on bread so hard it had to be soaked in water to be edible. This was not a small thing. This was everything. The Sherman's survival was built on 10,000 small things like this. On the can of beans that arrived on schedule, on the spare track link that was always in stock, on the radio battery that never ran out, on the air cover that appeared whenever it was called. The Germans had built better tanks, but they had not built the infrastructure to keep those tanks running. They had trained better crews, but they had not fed them. They had designed armor that could withstand any direct hit, but they had not secured the fuel to move it. And so, when the Sherman met the Tiger in the fields of Alsace, it was not really a contest between two machines. It was a contest between two systems, one that could sustain itself indefinitely and one that was already dying. The irony is that the Germans understood this, at least in part. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, reflecting on the North African campaign in a letter written shortly before his forced suicide in 1944, noted that the Allies' greatest weapon was not their tanks or planes, but their logistics. The battle is fought and decided by the quartermasters before the shooting begins, he wrote. But understanding a problem and solving it are not the same thing. And by 1944, Germany lacked the resources to solve the logistical crisis that was strangling its armies. The Sherman's so-called paper armor was irrelevant, because the real armor protecting American tank crews was measured not in millimeters of steel, but in thousands of miles of secure supply lines, in tens of thousands of transport trucks, in the uninterrupted production of a nation that had never been bombed, never been invaded, never been forced to choose between feeding its soldiers and feeding its civilians. The final accounting of the Sherman's legacy is, in this sense, less about the tank itself than about what it represented. It was a machine designed not for glory, but for work, for the unglamorous, grinding task of winning a war through persistence rather than brilliance. It was not the kind of weapon that inspired songs or legends. It did not have the sleek menace of a panther or the brutal invincibility of a tiger. But it had something more valuable. It existed in sufficient numbers, at the right time, in the right places, crewed by men who had learned how to use it as part of a larger system that no single tank, no matter how well armored, could ever defeat. And when the war ended, when the last tiger had been abandoned for lack of fuel and the last panther had broken down on a roadside in Bavaria, it was the Sherman that rolled into Berlin, into Vienna, into the ruins of the Reichstag. Not because it was invincible, but because it was still there, still moving, still functional, still crewed by men who had survived not through miracles, but through the patient, unglamorous work of logistics, doctrine, and industrial power. The German tank crews who had laughed at the Sherman's armor did not laugh in the end. Most of them were dead, or captured, or walking home through the rubble of a country that no longer existed. And the Shermans they had mocked rolled past them, carrying the soldiers of an army that had learned the hardest lesson of modern war, that survival is not a question of being the strongest, but of being strong enough, for long enough, until the other side has nothing left to fight with. That lesson, written in the wreckage of tigers and panthers and the oil-stained snow of 100 forgotten battlefields, is the Sherman's true legacy. Not a tank that could not be killed, but a tank that did not need to be unkillable. Not a machine that won through superiority, but one that won through sufficiency. And in the calculus of industrial war, sufficiency is the only kind of strength that endures. Years after the guns fell silent, a retired Wehrmacht officer, speaking to an American historian in a quiet room in Hamburg, was asked what he remembered most clearly about fighting the Shermans. He thought for a long time before answering. "It was not the tanks themselves," he said finally. "It was the fact that they never stopped coming. We would destroy 3, 4, 5 in a single engagement, and we would think we had won. And then the next day there would be 10 more, and the day after that 20 more. And we began to understand that we were not fighting tanks, we were fighting a country that could build tanks faster than we could destroy them. And once you understand that, you know the war is already lost." This was the truth that no amount of armor could protect against. The truth that wars are won not by the side with the best weapons, but by the side that can outlast, outproduce, and outfight the enemy until there is nothing left to contest. The Sherman was the instrument of that truth, a steel embodiment of the principle that in modern war, persistence is more valuable than perfection, and that the will to continue is stronger than any single blow. The fog had lifted by the time the last battles were fought. The fields were no longer silent, and the sound that echoed across them was not the crack of an 88mm gun, but the steady, relentless rumble of diesel engines, moving forward, always forward, until there was nowhere left to go.